Hi, it's me, and here we go again with another retest of a classic and well-respected old Canon lens, but on a modern high-resolution camera. And in the torture chamber today, we have the Canon EFS 15-85mm f3.5 to 5.6 IS USM. Originally designed for their APS-C digital SLR cameras, it can nowadays be fitted onto Canon EOS M and RF mount mirrorless cameras, if you use the correct adapter, of course. Here it is on my 32.5 megapixel Canon EOS R7. As I mentioned, it's an APS-C camera lens, so if you mounted it onto a full-frame EOS R camera, then you'll be forced to shoot in a lower resolution crop mode. Why should anyone be interested in this old camera lens nowadays? Well, for a start, it offers a fantastic zoom range which you can't really find on newer Canon APS-C lenses. 15-85mm is the full frame equivalent of 24-136, which is simply fabulous, especially being able to zoom out so far. Here's the difference between 18mm and 15mm. Might not seem like much, but you're getting a much wider angle than normal in there. And secondly, this lens always had a great reputation for being very high quality, a bit like its bigger, older brother, the 17-55mm f2.8, which I also retested recently, with some users even claiming it offered L-lens image quality, so that could make this thing ludicrously useful for landscape, travel, and general purpose photography, whenever a bright maximum aperture is not needed. The third reason anyone might be interested in this is its price. Nowadays, Canon only make and sell a small number of EFS lenses, and this unfortunately is no longer one of them. But over on eBay, you can find this thing for under $200, and I got this mint condition one here in the UK for only £140, which is potentially a complete bargain if it turns out to be any good. By the way, don't mix this lens up for the older 17-85, which was a rather mediocre quality optic, even in its time. The lens's build quality is typical for a mid-range Canon optic from 2009, being mostly constructed of high-quality plastics and weighing 575 grams, so it's not very heavy. It's based on a metal lens mount without any visible weather sealing, and with the old obnoxious plastic extension band that Canon put around their EFS lenses at the time to stop you mounting them onto a full frame camera. If you're adapting the lens onto a mirrorless camera, then it's not a problem though, it doesn't get in the way. Then come switches for image stabilization and autofocus. The image stabilization is the next generation up from the older 17-55mm f2.8 lens. It's almost silent in action, so that can be helpful when you're shooting video with the camera's onboard microphone. Here's some footage with that stabilization turned off and now turned on. It takes a few moments to kick in properly and only holds your image averagely stable, with a little jittering here and there, and when you tilt and pan, it shakes around a bit, so this thing is not ideal for video work, but it'll still help quite a bit for still shooting. Then comes the focus ring. It's not the best, it's a bit small and turns only averagely smoothly and only about 100 degrees. It's mechanically connected to the USM focus motor but on a clutch system, which means that you can turn that focus ring at any time. The autofocus, as you'd expect for an ultrasonic motor, is lovely and fast, emitting only a very quiet whooshing sound as it goes. When shooting on a modern mirrorless camera with an adapter, their contrast-based systems ensure excellent accuracy all the time, and this lens had no problems tracking subjects in autofocus either. Here you can see that whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, the lens struggles with fairly heavy focus breathing, so that could be another little irritating thing to video makers. Next comes the lens's rather chunky, rubberized focus ring. It turns averagely smoothly and not all that evenly, with just a touch of stickiness to it. It has a tendency to fall under its own weight a bit too, but only when held very high up or very low. The lens has a 72mm front filter thread. It doesn't come with a hood, but they are of course available separately. Overall, the lens is quick and easy to use. Autofocus is great, image stabilization just okay, and it's not really weather sealed. Honestly though, it's just a product of its time. So let's move on and check out its image quality. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be punishing this thing by testing it adapted onto a Canon EOS R7 with its APS-C sized 32.5 megapixel sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. At 15mm and f3.5, we are straight away seeing excellent sharpness and contrast in the middle. The image corners look softer, but actually we're still getting a surprisingly clear image there. f5.6 and f8 look about the same in the corners, a reasonable level of detail but not quite truly sharp. Stopping down to f11 or f16, as expected, just brings about softness due to diffraction. Well, let's zoom into 35mm now. Sharpness remains excellent in the middle of the image, although contrast is a bit lower than before. The corners look noticeably softer, but again, not completely disastrous. Stop down to f5.6 and those corners look just a touch sharper, and the middle has picked up a bit more contrast. Stop down to f8 or further, and again, the image just starts getting softer due to diffraction. There was no improvement in the image corners. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 85mm. The maximum aperture has now darkened to f5.6. In the middle, again, we are seeing great sharpness, but contrast levels aren't so hot. Corner image quality is noticeably soft, worse than it was at wider angles. Stop down to f8 and it improves just a little, but contrast levels are still a little mediocre across the whole image frame. At f11, despite the softening effects of diffraction, we are still seeing just a marginally better performance in those corners, although of course stop down further to f16 or higher and that diffraction just becomes overpowering. Overall, well, the lens's performance is just a little better than I was expecting, being always fantastically sharp in the middle of your images, and the image corners are just okay when shooting at wider angles or stopping down a little. I was hoping for a bit more contrast out of the lens though, although you can always add that in editing to an extent. On a 24 megapixel camera, you'll be fairly pleased with its results though. Anyway, let's turn off those in-camera corrections and take a look at the lens's distortion and vignetting. At 15mm and f3.5, we immediately hit a trouble spot with strong barrel distortion and dark image corners. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for those corners to brighten up. Zoom into 20mm and that distortion straightens out, and we don't even see much in the way of vignetting now. Even zoomed into 85mm, we are still seeing very little distortion, and vignetting is still low at f5.6 and gone at f8. So aside from the performance at 15mm, the lens is much better than average here, and certainly better than modern mirrorless lenses, which tend to leave their optical corrections to the camera to do instead. This lens has a lovely minimum focus distance of about 35cm, so when you're zoomed in, you can definitely get really close to your subject. At f5.6, close-up image quality is acceptably sharp, but definitely softer than it was at normal distances. Stopping down to f8 sees just a tiny improvement, but at f11, the image just gets softer again due to, well, you know, diffraction is a real enemy of this lens, isn't it? Well, let's see how the lens performs against bright lights now. When zoomed out, any kind of flaring and glaring are nothing to really worry about. They are there, but they're low. A good performance for a 15-year-old optic, really. Zoom in though, and things get a little worse, but only really when bright lights are directly in the image frame. Finally, let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. It's tricky to actually get out of focus backgrounds here because of the lens's relatively dark maximum aperture, but when you do, no problems at all. Overall, well, the lens is performing a little better than I thought it would, and I can see why users at the time with their 15 and 18 megapixel cameras would have been rather delighted. On a 32 megapixel camera, unsurprisingly, we experience unimpressive sharpness in the image corners, although it's never bad there, except at 85mm and f5.6. I think what really counts overall is that you're getting a perfectly usable zoom lens here with decent enough build and image quality, good flexibility, and all at a very low price. Well, if you can find a good copy on eBay, that is, and so for those willing to adapt it onto whatever camera they might have, then for its low price, it still comes recommended. Thanks for watching, everyone. I like retesting these old camera lenses. It's like I'm re-examining a little slice of photographic history. A big thanks to my Patreon supporters who make a big difference in keeping these videos coming and sponsorship free. Seriously, you have no idea how many emails I get from random people wanting to sponsor these videos and promote things, the most random things. If you're a fan, then check out my Patreon in the description below, where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content. Ciao for now, and God bless everyone.